Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name's Manju. I'm a co-founder and CTO of a company called Avora. I've created this channel to share tips and lessons that I've learned over the last 18 years. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about why building software applications is so hard. What are the real reasons for this? And I'll be also providing some tips and tricks on how to overcome some of these issues. I've been working in software development for many years in many different businesses of different sizes across different industries. I've worked on many different types of teams across this time. So this has given me a lot of data points to figure out what works well and what doesn't work quite so well. It's quite a new field. It hasn't been around for very long. Even through that time period, i.e. the last 20-30 years, the landscape has changed massively. If you think about it, you have the internet, you have computers which have massively shrunk in size, and you also have the advent of the mobile phone, which has got more and more powerful as years have gone by. One of the big challenges with writing software is that the best practices and the platforms that you're building it for have changed quite significantly. Whereas in the past, you might have been building applications that ran on data centers, and then you move to writing for desktops, to the cloud, to mobile devices. So you're kind of working on shifting sands, and this has meant that creating best practices such as there are in other fields, such as architecture, is quite challenging for software. Second of all, software is just inherently quite an abstract concept compared to, say, building a house. When you're building a house, you have bricks and you have walls, and you can see if you're building the wall in the right way. It's very easy for you to talk with your customers or your clients to say, hey, look, here's the wall. Is it what you wanted? And they're not going to turn around and actually say, no, I didn't want a wall, I wanted a fence. Whereas with software engineering, this is a lot more prevalent. It's a lot more difficult to define your requirements so specifically so that both parties are in total sync in terms of what they want versus what the developers are going to build. It's very hard for customers that are non-technical to really understand the inherent complexity which comes with building a feature. And so when at the last minute the customer asks for the developer to just make some tweaks, they don't necessarily understand all the complexity and all the work that needs to go into making the change, testing the change, and then actually deploying it to a production system. Estimation is definitely one of the hardest parts of writing software, to the extent that there's been many books that have been published, but it still doesn't quite feel like we're really there to be able to give confident estimates when it comes to building complex pieces of code. I also wanted to give a little story from my own experiences. I used to work for a retailer that used to sell watches in a physical brick and mortar store, and they were making the move online. And so what they had a very good understanding of what happens when the customer comes through their door and all the steps that happen before the customer makes a purchase. From our perspective, there was a lot of education that we had to do to educate the client that when the customer moves online, then you have concepts such as a basket, you have a checkout process, you have a product page. And so not only were we having to decipher the customer's requirements to actually build something that they wanted, but we also had to bring the customer along on a journey and to educate them about all the differences that happen when you're selling something online versus when you're selling it in a brick and mortar physical store. Another big challenge with writing software is that a client can come to you with a set of requirements, but what they thought they wanted wasn't actually what they wanted, or they didn't have a good enough idea at the beginning, and it was only through using your final product that they were actually able to refine their requirements. And this is a big frustration for many developers, and it's happened to me throughout my career. So how do you mitigate against this? How do you help to stop this from happening in the future? I think Agile software development has definitely helped to address some of these challenges that happen when you're building software, compared to previously when you had things like waterfall approach to building software, where you take all the requirements at the beginning and then you just build everything out and throw it across to the customer. With Agile software development, you have iterations. The customer is involved at a much earlier stage. Instead of giving them one massive thing at the end, you're giving them smaller iterations and smaller chunks so they can provide feedback, and that feedback loop can then address the issues, and you're able to fix things at a much earlier stage and steer the whole product in the right direction. However, Agile software development has its own problems. There's often a lack of documentation. It's even harder to provide estimates for the overall project, and so the customer often doesn't have a very clear idea of when they're actually going to get the overall completed product. I wanted to drill in a little bit further about all the complexity that a software developer has to deal with when they're building a particular piece of functionality or a new feature. You have all the different components, you have all the different external systems that a particular feature or functionality has to integrate with. And then you also have to handle error situations, handle unexpected feedback from the users. So when you take all of these factors into account, you end up with a massive explosion of complexity. And so many different things can go wrong, and the developer has to take into account all of these different things. Only after all those things have been addressed do you get a stable piece of functionality that can be used. In conclusion, there are a lot of challenges with software development and complexity specifically. There have been many new tools and processes that have been created to try and address these problems, the Agile methodology being one of these. A lot of them involve communicating more effectively and having small iterations so that the customer can provide feedback in a more faster and efficient way. I still think we need an overall shake-up in the way that we define requirements and the way that those requirements are conveyed to developers, and then the whole feedback loop still has a lot of scope for improvement, in my opinion. That's all for today. Please leave any feedback or any comments or any other suggestions that you might have for improving software development. I'll be sure to have a look at it, and I'll see you in the next video.